One day, this guy and his girlfriend, they're running through the woods, and they got no clothes on. And they're scared out of their minds, because they're being chased by a satanic cult. So the guy's name is Julian, and Julian goes to church and shit. He's very religious, and he's got a girlfriend, her, Carolynne. And Carolynne, also very religious. So they date for a couple of years, and they both agree that they're not gonna be intimate. They're not gonna smash, they are saving themselves for marriage. Until one day, I guess Julian gets tired of waiting because he suddenly starts pressuring her to get married. And he keeps pressuring her and he keeps pressuring her, and she's just not really feeling that. So it doesn't look like he's ever gonna smash. And that is when Julian comes up with a plan. He decides he's gonna take Carolynne on this romantic picnic. So they go on this picnic and they're driving back through the countryside, and suddenly Julian spots something on the side of the road. And he's like, whoa, a hurt animal. So he pulls over and he gets out and he walks into the trees to check it out. So he's in the woods and boom, a bunch of kidnappers suddenly grab him. Meanwhile, back at the car, a man in a ski mask ambushes Carolynne inside the car, and she screams, but he hog-ties her and he blindfolds her. Then he cuts off all her clothes and she's there naked, and he forces her into the back seat. Then he steals the car with her still in it. Now this kidnapper drives for 6 hours before he stops and he throws her out of the car onto the ground. Then he goes and he gets a shovel and he digs a hole nearby like he's digging a grave. Meanwhile, Carolynne's just lying there panicking, like she can't see anything, but she can still hear. And that is when she hears a voice, and it's Julian. And he's like, babe, wake up. And he unties her, and she can see that he's naked too. And he's like, we were kidnapped by a satanic cult, and now they're after us. We have to run. So there they are. They're both naked, running for their lives through the wilderness because this crazy satanic cult is about to get them. So Julian and Carolynne hide out for days in the rough terrain while they try and outmaneuver this kidnapping cult. And I guess Julian had somehow managed to swipe a sleeping bag and a jar of peanut butter from the kidnappers, so they got that going for them. But every day they're out there, it gets colder and colder. And one night they're still out there and they are freezing cold. And that's when Julian suggests that to help them keep warm, they get intimate. And Carolynne's like, nah, I'm good. And he pressures her and he pressures her just like he did before. And he's like, what if we just got married right here and now? And she's still like, nah. And he keeps pressuring her and she keeps turning him down, and eventually he just gives up. And soon they're back on the run and Julian's like trying to navigate them through the terrain. And boom, they stumble upon the place where the kidnappers first dropped them off, the place where that kidnapper dug the hole. And then they find a backpack with their clothes in it. So they get dressed and they start walking again. And at this point, they've been lost out here for almost a week. But they eventually find a road, and a local farmer's passing by, and he sees them and he calls the police. So police show up, and Julian and Carolynne end up telling him this whole story about how they were kidnapped and chased by this crazy satanic cult. And pretty quickly, the police are like, satanic cult? Yeah, that's not really adding up. So they let them go to recover. But then later, they bring Julian back in to question him again. And that is when Julian finally snaps, and he drops a bomb on them. What did he tell them? One day, I guess Julian gets tired of waiting because he suddenly starts pressuring her to get married. And he keeps pressuring her and he keeps pressuring her, and she's just not really feeling that. And that is when Julian comes up with a plan. He goes and he gets a deer skin and he drives it out to the countryside and he puts it on the side of the road. Then later, when he and Carolynne drive by, he's like, whoa, a hurt animal. And then he pulls over and he gets out and he goes into the woods. And there is where he changes clothes and he puts on a ski mask. Then he goes back to Carolynne, who's still in the car, and he pretends to be a kidnapper. Then he cuts off all her clothes, he ties her up, he blindfolds her, and then he drives them 6 hours to the middle of nowhere, and then, yeah, you know the rest. So there was no crazy satanic cult. Julian made it all up. So Julian confesses all this to police, but that's not the only thing he confesses. He also confesses that he staged this elaborate kidnapping plot so that he and Carolynne would eventually end up in the woods together, alone, cold, and naked, so that she would eventually be intimate with him. So they arrest him, they charge him with kidnapping, and he's sentenced to around 8 years in prison. And all this happened in Australia, so shout out to Australia.